April 20th, 1943. 5 miles above the Mediterranean Sea, just off the coast of Sicily. First Lieutenant James Walker of the 332nd Fighter Group checked his oxygen mask as his P-40 Warhawk climbed through churning steel-grey clouds. The weather report had promised clear skies, perfect for the German bomber formation expected to pass through this sector en route to Allied positions in North Africa. Walker smiled to himself, thinking how visibility worked both ways. The Germans wouldn't see him coming either. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how one pilot would turn the very discrimination he faced into a tactical advantage, forever changing how his squadron approached aerial combat, and proving that sometimes the most effective weapon in warfare isn't technology or firepower, but the unique perspective born from a lifetime of having to see what others refuse to acknowledge. Lieutenant Walker tightened his grip on the control stick, feeling the vibrations of the Allison V1710 engine as it strained against the thin air. At 27,000 feet, the temperature outside his cockpit had plummeted to negative 40 degrees. Ice crystals formed at the edges of his canopy, despite the defroster working at maximum capacity. Walker had spent 942 hours in the cockpit of the P-40, more than any other pilot in his squadron. He knew its every quirk and limitation. "Lookout leader to squadron. Maintain formation integrity," he called over the radio. "Cloud ceiling at 29,000 feet. We'll use the cloud deck as cover. Echo formation, over." 5 acknowledgements came back in sequence. Walker led a 6-plane element, Sergeants Miller, Johnson, Tate, Wilson and Thompson, flying in tight formation behind him. They had been flying together for 4 months, having completed training at Tuskegee Army Airfield before deployment to North Africa with the 332nd Fighter Group. They called themselves the Cloud Hawks, though officially they were just Red Squadron Delta Flight. Captain Richard Williams's voice crackled through the radio from the command center in Tunis. "Red Leader, intelligence reports 12 German bombers inbound from Sicily, heading 090. Estimated time of arrival in your sector, 7 minutes. Meteorology confirms cloud ceiling holding at 29,000. Maintain current course." Walker acknowledged the transmission and checked his instrument panel. Fuel reserves, 60%. Ammunition, full load, 650 caliber machine guns. His squadron had been assigned to patrol this corridor for 3 consecutive days without making contact. This would be their first engagement. "Remember the plan," Walker called to his men. "We stay in the clouds until the last possible moment. The German formation won't expect an attack from above the cloud layer. They'll be watching below." The strategy was born from Walker's experiences growing up in Birmingham, Alabama. As the son of a Pullman porter, he had learned early that sometimes invisibility could be used to advantage. His father had often told him, "In a world that doesn't want to see you, you can observe everything unseen." Now 26,000 feet above the Mediterranean, those words guided his combat philosophy. At Tuskegee, many instructors had emphasized conventional engagement tactics, but one, Captain Benjamin Davis, had encouraged Walker to develop alternative approaches. "The same people who say you can't fly will never see you coming," Davis had told him. "Use that." The 6 P-40 Warhawks continued their patrol pattern, hidden above the dense cloud layer. Each plane carried 200 rounds per gun, 1,200 rounds total, enough for approximately 15 seconds of continuous fire. Timing would be critical. "Contacts spotted," reported Lieutenant Johnson, Walker's wingman, "breaking through the cloud floor at Vector 117. Walker peered through his canopy. Just as Johnson had reported, dark shapes were emerging from the clouds below, a tight formation of Heinkel 111 bombers. Walker counted 12, exactly as intelligence had predicted. The German aircraft were maintaining a steady course eastward, unaware of the American fighters lurking above. "Confirm visual on 12 bombers," Walker said calmly into his oxygen mask. "They're flying at 26,000 feet just below the cloud ceiling. Perfect." Back at Tunis headquarters, Captain Williams monitored the situation through radar reports. He had advocated for Walker's experimental tactics, despite skepticism from higher command. Colonel Johnson had questioned whether placing an all-black squadron on such a critical patrol sector was prudent. The 332nd hasn't proven itself in combat yet, Johnson had argued during the mission briefing. Williams had countered, Lieutenant Walker logged more flight hours in training than any other pilot from his class. His tactical proposals are sound. Now, as the radar showed the converging aircraft, Williams hoped his faith would be justified. In the cockpit, Walker checked his watch. The German formation would reach their designated interception point in 90 seconds. He reviewed the plan once more. They would descend rapidly through the clouds, emerging behind and above the bomber formation. The element of surprise would be total. Delta Flight, check weapons, Walker instructed. 5 confirmations came back, all guns operational. 20 seconds to engagement, Walker announced. Remember, aim for engines and wing routes, avoid prolonged exposure. 1 pass, then back into the clouds. Execute on my mark. Walker had studied German bomber formations extensively. The Heinkel 111 typically flew with rear-facing defensive guns, a 20mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns. Their blind spot was directly above and behind. 3-2-1 mark. Walker pushed his stick forward, and his P-40 nosed downward. The other 5 fighters followed in perfect formation. They plunged through the cloud layer, emerging precisely where Walker had calculated, 500 feet above and behind the German bomber formation. The bombers had no warning. 6 American fighters appeared suddenly from the cloud ceiling, diving toward them with machine guns blazing. Walker focused on the lead bomber, squeezing his trigger. The 650 caliber guns roared to life, sending tracers streaking toward the German aircraft. Within seconds, 3 bombers had sustained critical damage, trailing smoke as they lost altitude. The remaining 9 attempted evasive maneuvers, breaking formation and diving toward the safety of thicker clouds below. Back to the clouds, Walker commanded, pulling his aircraft upward. His squadron followed, disappearing back into the grey mist before the German gunners could respond effectively. Flight Sergeant Heinrich Müller, navigator aboard the lead Heinkel, frantically tried to make sense of what had just happened. One moment they had been flying in steady formation, the next, chaos. 3 aircraft lost in less than 30 seconds. "Where did they come from?" demanded Major Bruno Schmidt, the formation commander. "Above, sir," Müller replied. "They emerged from the clouds directly above us." Schmidt had never encountered such tactics. German doctrine held that Allied fighters typically approached from below or head-on. This attack pattern was unprecedented. Walker regrouped his squadron above the cloud layer. "Confirm status," he called. All 5 wingmen reported in. No damage sustained. "Prepare for second engagement," Walker instructed. "They'll be scattered now, defensive posture. We'll target individuals. Same approach. Use the clouds for concealment until the last possible moment." Captain Williams's voice came through the radio. "Excellent work, Red Leader. Radar shows the German formation has dispersed. 3 aircraft appear to be returning to Sicily, 9 continuing on course, but in disarray." Walker acknowledged. "We're proceeding with follow-up engagement." Williams hesitated. "Be advised, reinforcements may be inbound from Sicily. Intelligence reports increased radio traffic, suggesting additional fighter support." "Understood," Walker replied. "We'll complete one more attack run and then evaluate." The Cloudhawks regrouped and prepared for their second assault. Walker led them to a different section of the cloud layer, calculating the most likely position of the scattered bombers. "Remember, 1 pass only," Walker reminded his squadron. "These aren't training exercises anymore." The 6 fighters descended through the clouds again, emerging at different points to target individual bombers. Walker found himself behind a lone Heinkel that had strayed from the others. He lined up his shot carefully and fired a short burst. The bomber's starboard engine erupted in flames. Across the scattered battlefield, the other Cloudhawks engaged their targets with similar success. Within minutes, 3 more German bombers had sustained critical damage and were forced to abort their mission, turning back toward Sicily. "Mission accomplished," Walker announced as they regrouped once more above the clouds. 6 enemy aircraft disabled, 6 turning back. That's all 12 accounted for. The squadron returned to their base in Tunis, landing 4 hours after takeoff. As they taxied to their designated area, segregated from the main airfield where white pilots' aircraft were serviced, Ground crews rushed to meet them. Technical Sergeant Raymond Carter approached Walker's aircraft as he climbed out of the cockpit. "How'd she handle, Lieutenant?" "Like a dream, Ray," Walker replied, patting the fuselage of his P-40. "The engine modifications you suggested made a difference at high altitude." Carter nodded with satisfaction. He had been experimenting with carburetor adjustments to improve the P-40's performance above 25,000 feet, where the Allison engine typically struggled. "Good to hear, sir. The mechanics and I have some other ideas to improve climb rate." Walker appreciated Carter's innovations. Like many of the ground crew assigned to the 332nd, Carter had been an engineering student before the war, but had been denied the opportunity to apply his talents in the civilian workforce. "We'll discuss it at the debriefing," Walker said. "I want all maintenance personnel there. This victory belongs to everyone." In the debriefing room, Captain Williams stood before a large tactical map, marking the engagement zone with small flags. Colonel Johnson was present as well, his expression carefully neutral. "Gentlemen," Williams began when all pilots and key ground personnel had assembled, "congratulations on a successful mission. Intelligence confirms that none of the German bombers reached their targets. 6 returned to Sicily with significant damage, 4 crash-landed on the Sicilian coast, and 2 are unaccounted for, presumed lost at sea." A murmur of satisfaction passed through the room. "Lieutenant Walker," Williams continued, "please explain your tactical approach for the record." Walker stepped forward. "Sir, we utilized the cloud cover as both concealment and a fighting position. By stationing our squadron above the cloud ceiling, we remained undetected by German reconnaissance. When the bomber formation passed beneath our position, we were able to attack from their blind spot, achieving complete tactical surprise." Colonel Johnson frowned. "This is unorthodox. Standard engagement protocols call for intercepting enemy bombers from below or head-on." "With respect, sir," Walker replied, "standard protocols assume standard conditions. Our squadron has been operating with older P-40 models, while other groups have received the newer P-51 Mustangs. We've had to adapt our tactics accordingly." Williams interjected, "The results speak for themselves, Colonel. 12 enemy bombers neutralized without a single loss on our side." Johnson remained skeptical. "It was a successful mission, I grant you, but I question whether this approach can be replicated consistently." "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Walker asked. Johnson nodded curtly. "The Germans expect us to follow conventional tactics because that's what they've been trained to defend against. By approaching from unconventional angles and using natural cover, we turn our perceived disadvantages into tactical opportunities. The enemy prepares for what they expect to see. We succeed by showing them what they don't." The room fell silent as Johnson considered Walker's words. Finally, he nodded. "Document your approach, Lieutenant." "I want a full tactical analysis for potential implementation across other fighter groups." Walker saluted. "Yes, sir." As the meeting concluded, Johnson pulled Williams aside. "Keep an eye on Walker. If his methods continue to produce results, I want to know about it." Williams watched Johnson leave, then turned to Walker. "Good work today, Lieutenant. Your father would be proud." Walker looked up, surprised. "You knew my father?" "We served together in the Great War," Williams explained. "Different units, of course. I was an officer. He was with the 369th Infantry, but we crossed paths during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. He was a good man." Walker nodded, emotion briefly crossing his face. "He never talked much about the war, just said he did his duty, same as everyone else." "He did more than most," Williams said quietly, "and now you're carrying on that tradition." Later that evening, Walker sat in his quarters, writing in his tactical journal. The successful engagement had validated his approach, but he knew one victory wasn't enough to change entrenched perspectives. The 332nd, the Cloudwalkers, as they were sometimes called, still had much to prove. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Lieutenant Johnson entered, carrying a bottle and 2 cups. "Thought you might want to celebrate, sir." Walker smiled. "Pull up a chair, Johnson." Johnson poured 2 measures of amber liquid. "To invisible men," he said, raising his cup. Walker understood the reference to Ralph Ellison's new novel. "To being seen when it counts," he replied. They drank in companionable silence before Johnson spoke again. "The ground crews are already talking about modifications to improve our cloud diving capabilities. Carter's working on some carburetor adjustments that might give us better throttle response during rapid descents." Walker nodded. "I've been thinking about our next patrol. The Germans will adapt quickly. They might start placing observers above their formations or deploying fighters at higher altitudes." "So we change too," Johnson suggested. "Maybe approach from within the clouds next time, not just above them. Use the broken sections for peekaboo attacks." Walker considered this, making notes in his journal. "We'd need to practice formation flying with minimal visibility. It's risky." "So was today," Johnson pointed out. "But we pulled it off." Their conversation was interrupted by another knock. Sergeant Wilson appeared in the doorway, excitement evident on his face. "Sirs, you need to hear this," he said, holding up a small radio. "Allied Command just issued a press release about our engagement." He turned up the volume, and the voice of a BBC announcer filled the small room. "American fighters successfully intercepted a formation of 12 enemy bombers over the Mediterranean today, preventing an attack on Allied shipping. All enemy aircraft were turned back, with at least 6 confirmed disabled. This marks a significant tactical victory in the air campaign over the Mediterranean theater." Walker and Johnson exchanged glances. The announcement made no mention of which fighter group had achieved the victory. "They'll never say it was us," Wilson said, his earlier excitement fading. Walker shrugged. "We know. That's enough for now." "Is it?" Johnson asked quietly. "It has to be," Walker replied. "We're fighting 2 wars here, one against the enemy abroad and one against perception at home. Today we won a battle in both." Wilson turned off the radio. "Captain Williams is requesting volunteers for a special training exercise tomorrow. Something about adaptation of your cloud cover tactics." "Tell him I'm in," Walker said, "and spread the word. I want everyone who's interested to participate. Pilots, mechanics, radio operators, everyone. This isn't just about flying differently. It's about thinking differently." The following morning, 14 pilots and 27 ground crew members gathered on the airfield before dawn. Captain Williams stood before them, a tactical map spread across the hood of a jeep. "Lieutenant Walker's successful engagement yesterday has opened up new possibilities," Williams explained. "High Command is interested in developing these tactics further. But before they commit resources, they want proof this wasn't just a lucky break." Walker stepped forward. "Captain Williams has authorized a demonstration exercise. We'll simulate combat conditions against our own aircraft acting as enemy bombers. 2 flights will alternate roles, attackers and targets. We'll document everything for analysis." The training exercises continued for 2 weeks. Each day, Walker refined his approach, incorporating suggestions from pilots and ground crew alike. Technical Sergeant Carter developed a modified carburetor system that improved engine performance during rapid altitude changes. Radio operators devised new communication protocols for coordinating attacks through cloud cover. Even the intelligence officers contributed, analyzing German response patterns to develop predictive models. By the end of the 2nd week, what had begun as an improvised tactic had evolved into a comprehensive combat doctrine. Walker documented everything in a 40-page manual titled Atmospheric Advantage, Tactical Implementation of Natural Cover in Aerial Combat. Captain Williams forwarded the manual to Allied Command with his endorsement. The response came 3 days later. Authorization for a specialized training program to be implemented across 3 additional fighter groups, with Walker temporarily promoted to captain and assigned as lead instructor. Colonel Johnson personally delivered the news. "Congratulations, Captain Walker," he said, handing over the promotion orders. "It seems your unconventional thinking has caught the attention of some very conventional minds." Walker accepted the orders with surprise. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored." Johnson's expression remained serious. "Don't thank me yet. There's considerable resistance to implementing these tactics more broadly. Some officers are concerned about resource allocation, training requirements, and—" He hesitated. "Other factors." You mean they're concerned about taking tactical direction from black officers? Walker said directly. Johnson didn't deny it. Politics and warfare make uncomfortable bedfellows, Captain, but results speak louder than prejudice. Eventually, your job is to keep producing those results. Understood, sir. As Johnson turned to leave, he paused. For what it's worth, Walker, I was skeptical too. Not because of who you are, but because innovation is always met with resistance in military circles. Proving me wrong was the easy part. Proving everyone else wrong will be considerably harder. Walker spent that evening in the operations room, reviewing intelligence reports. German bomber formations had altered their patterns, now flying with fighter escorts positioned at various altitudes. They were adapting, just as he'd predicted. Lieutenant Johnson found him there past midnight, still working. News travels fast, Johnson said, dropping a newspaper on the table. The Stars and Stripes picked up the story. Walker glanced at the article. It mentioned the innovative cloud cover tactics being developed, but attributed them to Allied Fighter Command, with no reference to the 332nd. At least they're talking about the tactics, Walker said. That's a start. Johnson shook his head. A start isn't enough. We're risking our lives up there just like everyone else. And changing the way this war is fought, Walker added, one mission at a time. The next morning, Walker received new orders. A large German bomber formation was expected to target Allied shipping off the coast of Algeria. 3 fighter groups would be deployed to intercept, including 2 squadrons that had been hastily trained in Walker's cloud cover tactics. Captain Williams called an emergency briefing. "This is it, gentlemen," he told the assembled pilots. "Your chance to prove these tactics work at scale. Intelligence reports 20+ enemy bombers with fighter escort. Allied Command has assigned 2 additional fighter groups to operate under Captain Walker's tactical direction." Walker felt the weight of every eye in the room. "We'll operate as 3 distinct elements," he explained, pointing to the tactical map. "Red Group will maintain position above the primary cloud layer. Blue Group will operate within broken cloud formations to the east, and Yellow Group will position below the cloud ceiling to prevent enemy aircraft from escaping downward." A lieutenant from one of the newly assigned squadrons raised his hand. "Sir, our pilots have only had 3 days of training with these methods. Are you sure?" "No, Lieutenant, I'm not sure," Walker interrupted. "War doesn't wait for certainty. But I am confident. These tactics work because they exploit fundamental aspects of aerial combat that transcend training time, visibility, expectation, and positioning. Follow the protocols we've established, and we'll succeed." As the briefing concluded, Walker felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Technical Sergeant Carter. "The modifications have been installed on all aircraft in your squadron," Carter said. "The other group's planes have standard configurations." Walker nodded. "Then we'll lead the initial engagement. Show them how it's done." Dawn broke with scattered clouds over the Mediterranean, ideal conditions for Walker's strategy. 24 Allied fighters took off from bases across North Africa, converging on the designated patrol sector. In his cockpit, Walker reviewed the mission parameters once more. Intelligence placed the German formation 160 miles north, approaching from Sicily. Allied radar would direct them to the precise interception point. "Lookout leader to all groups," Walker called over the radio. "Maintain assigned altitudes and prepare for approach protocols. Red Group above clouds at 30,000. Blue Group within broken cover at 26,000. Yellow Group below ceiling at 22,000. A chorus of acknowledgements came back, some confident, others nervous. Captain Williams's voice came through clearly from command. "Intelligence update. German formation includes 24 Heinkel 111s with 8 Me-109 fighter escorts. Estimated time to intercept, 17 minutes. Walker checked his instruments. Everything was functioning perfectly. The modified carburetor provided smooth power delivery even at this altitude, where the air was thin and cold. "This is it," he muttered to himself, "our moment to be seen." The radar officer's voice crackled through the radio. "Enemy formation approaching Vector 045, range 8 miles. They've split into 2 groups. 12 bombers have descended to 20,000 feet. 12 maintaining at 25,000, fighter escort positioned above at 28,000. Walker processed this information quickly. The Germans had adapted their approach, spreading their formation across multiple altitudes to counter the very tactics he had developed. "They're learning," he said to himself, a small smile forming beneath his oxygen mask. "Good. So are we." Walker keyed his radio. "All groups, the enemy has split their formation. Adjust intercept as follows. Yellow group, engage lower bomber formation. Blue group, maintain position for mid-altitude bombers. Red group, we're going after those escorts." It was a calculated risk. The fighter escorts were Me-109s, faster and more maneuverable than Walker's P-40s. But they wouldn't be expecting an attack from above, and that surprise might be enough to even the odds. "Red group, follow me into the clouds," Walker commanded. "We emerge on my mark, targeting the fighter escort first. Clear those 109s, and the bombers lose their protection." Walker led his 6 planes higher, disappearing into the thick cloud layer at 32,000 feet. Beneath them, Blue Group and Yellow Group moved into position for their own engagements. Through breaks in the clouds, Walker caught glimpses of the German formation below. The fighter escorts were flying in a loose screening pattern above the higher bomber group, scanning the skies below them for threats. None of them was looking up. Walker positioned his squadron directly above the German fighters. "Red group on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." 6 P-40 Warhawks plunged through the clouds, dropping like hawks upon unsuspecting prey. The effect was immediate and devastating. 2 German fighters went down in the first 30 seconds, caught completely by surprise as the American P-40s emerged from the cloud cover directly above them. The remaining 6 Me-109s scattered, breaking formation as they tried to comprehend what was happening. "Red group execute secondary pattern," Walker commanded, pulling his aircraft into a steep climb that carried him back into the protective cover of the clouds. His squadron followed, disappearing from view before the German pilots could organize a counterattack. Lieutenant Johnson's voice came through the radio, tinged with excitement. "It worked, Captain. They never saw us coming." "Stay focused," Walker replied, maneuvering his aircraft through the dense cloud layer. "We regroup and hit them again from a different vector. They'll be scanning the clouds now, expecting us to come from the same direction." Below, the German fighter commander, Major Wilhelm Hoffmann, was frantically trying to reorganize his scattered escorts. He had lost 2 aircraft in less than a minute, attacked from a direction he had never anticipated. "Maintain altitude 28,000, Hoffmann ordered his remaining pilots. "Formation Diamond, scan all sectors, including above. They're using the clouds." In the American command center in Algiers, officers crowded around the radar display, tracking the engagement. Colonel Patrick Harris, who had initially opposed Walker's tactical innovations, watched with growing interest as the radar showed the German formation's disarray. "Remarkable," he murmured to Captain Williams, who stood beside him. "The escorts are completely disorganized." Williams nodded. "That's the point, sir. Conventional doctrine says fighter escorts should be engaged last, after the bombers are dealt with. Walker turned that on its head. Take out the protection first, from where they least expect it." Harris frowned. "It's still a significant risk. Those P-40s are outclassed by the 109s in a straight fight." "Which is precisely why Captain Walker isn't giving them a straight fight," Williams replied. "His pilots never remain engaged for more than 30 seconds before returning to cloud cover. They're fighting on their terms, not the Germans." Back in the sky, Walker was repositioning Red Group for their second attack. "Blue Leader status report," he called. "Blue Group engaging mid-altitude bombers," came the reply. 3 enemy aircraft disabled. No losses on our side." "Yellow Leader report. Yellow Group has engaged lower bomber formation. 2 enemy aircraft turning back. One of our planes damaged but still airworthy." Walker processed this information quickly. 5 German fighters and 5 bombers had been neutralized or forced to turn back. That left 3 fighters and 19 bombers still in the fight. Good progress, but the mission was far from complete. "Red Group, we're changing approach," Walker announced. "The fighter escort is attempting to consolidate around the upper bomber formation. We'll split our attack. Elements 1 and 2 will continue engaging fighters. Elements 3 and 4 will drop down to support Blue Group against the bombers. Walker led Elements 1 and 2, himself, Johnson, and 2 other pilots, back toward the German fighter escort. As predicted, the remaining Me-109s had regrouped and were now flying in a tight defensive formation, scanning all directions. "They're ready for us this time," Johnson observed. "But they still don't know exactly where we'll come from," Walker replied. "We use multiple entry points. Element 1 from northeast, Element 2 from northwest. Attack simultaneously." The P-40s separated, disappearing into different sections of the cloud layer before emerging at precisely the same moment from opposite directions. The German fighters, focused on defending from above, were caught in a crossfire. In his cockpit, Major Hoffman saw American fighters appearing from 2 different cloud banks simultaneously. "Evasive maneuvers," he shouted into his radio, but it was too late. 2 more of his fighters sustained critical damage before they could react. "Back to the clouds," Walker commanded after the brief engagement. His planes vanished once more into the protective grey mist. Hoffman was down to just 4 operational fighters trying to protect 12 bombers. The situation was becoming untenable. "This is hopeless," he muttered to himself. Making a difficult decision, he keyed his radio. "All escorts, we are abandoning the upper bomber group. Descend to 20,000 feet to reinforce lower group protection." The remaining German fighters dove toward the lower bomber formation, leaving the upper 12 bombers completely exposed. Walker, monitoring German radio transmissions through his intelligence officer, received the translated communication almost immediately. "Red Group, the upper bomber formation is now unprotected. All elements converge. Blue Group, prepare to engage." What followed was textbook execution of Walker's cloud cover tactics. The American fighters appeared suddenly from multiple directions, striking the unprotected bombers in coordinated waves. Each attack lasted less than 20 seconds before the P-40s disappeared back into the clouds, only to emerge from different angles moments later. By the 15-minute mark, 8 of the 12 bombers in the upper formation had been disabled or forced to turn back. The remaining 4 descended rapidly, seeking protection with the lower group. In the lower engagement zone, Yellow Group was holding its own against the bomber formation and their fighter escort. 3 more German bombers had been forced to abort their mission. "Upper bomber formation has collapsed," Walker reported to command. 4 aircraft descending to join lower group, Red Group moving to support Yellow Group. Colonel Harris, still watching the radar display in Algiers, shook his head in amazement. "I wouldn't have believed it if I wasn't seeing it myself. They've neutralized more than half the German force without losing a single aircraft." Captain Williams allowed himself a small smile. "All due respect, sir, but this is exactly what Captain Walker predicted in his tactical manual. The clouds aren't just cover, they're a force multiplier." The radar operator interrupted. "Sir, remaining German aircraft are turning back. They're aborting the mission." The officers watched as the radar showed the German formation reversing course, heading back towards Sicily. In his cockpit, Walker received confirmation from command. "All enemy aircraft retreating. Intercept complete. Return to base." Walker keyed his radio. "All groups, mission accomplished. Form up for return to base." As the American fighters regrouped for the journey home, Walker took a moment to appreciate what they had achieved. 24 German aircraft had set out to bomb Allied shipping. Not one had reached its target. More importantly, they had done it with minimal losses. Just 1 American plane damaged, none shot down. The flight back to North Africa was subdued, pilots conserving energy and fuel after the intense engagement. Walker used the time to mentally compose his after-action report. The tactics had worked even better than he had anticipated, particularly the multi-vector attacks and the targeting of fighter escorts first. Upon landing at their base outside Algiers, the pilots were surprised to find Colonel Harris waiting on the tarmac alongside Captain Williams. As Walker climbed down from his cockpit, Harris approached him directly. "Captain Walker," Harris said formally, "that was an impressive display of tactical innovation. 24 enemy aircraft turned back, 14 confirmed disabled, and no losses on our side." Walker saluted. "Thank you, sir. The credit belongs to all 3 groups. They executed the plan perfectly." Harris nodded. "I've reviewed your tactical manual. Initially, I had reservations about its broader application. Those reservations have been addressed. I'm recommending immediate implementation across all fighter groups in the Mediterranean theater." Walker was momentarily speechless. This was far more than he had hoped for. Williams stepped forward. "There's more, Captain. Allied Command is establishing a dedicated tactical training unit to standardize these methods. They're calling it the Atmospheric Combat School. They want you to head it." Harris extended his hand to Walker, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. "Congratulations, Major Walker. Your promotion paperwork is already being processed." Walker shook the colonel's hand, acutely aware of the significance of the moment. "I'm honored, sir, but I'd like to request that my entire squadron be assigned to the training unit. These tactics were developed collectively, and they should be taught the same way." Harris hesitated, then nodded. "Granted. Report to headquarters tomorrow morning for detailed briefing." As Harris departed, Walker turned to Williams. "Did that really just happen?" Williams smiled. "It did, though I suspect Colonel Harris's newfound appreciation has more to do with the 24 German aircraft you prevented from reaching their targets than any sudden moral awakening." "I'll take it," Walker replied pragmatically. "Results first, recognition later." The following morning, Walker entered Allied headquarters in Algiers for his briefing. The operations room was filled with senior officers, many of whom had previously dismissed his tactical innovations. Now they looked at him with newfound respect, or at least begrudging acknowledgement. General Robert Thompson, commander of Allied air operations in the Mediterranean, led the briefing. "Gentlemen, yesterday's engagement demonstrated the effectiveness of what we're now calling Multi-Layer Cloud Tactical Engagement, or MCTE for short. Major Walker's approach has proven its worth in combat, and we're implementing it across all fighter groups effective immediately." The general gestured to a large map on the wall, showing patrol sectors across the Mediterranean. "We're reorganizing our air defense strategy to maximize the effectiveness of these tactics. This includes new patrol altitudes, modified aircraft loadouts, and specialized meteorological support to identify optimal cloud conditions." Walker listened with growing satisfaction as his improvised approach was formalized into official doctrine. What had begun as a necessary adaptation by an under-equipped, underappreciated squadron was now being adopted by the entire Allied Air Force in the region. After the briefing, General Thompson took Walker aside. "I understand you developed these tactics out of necessity, Major. Your squadron was operating P-40s, while other groups received newer aircraft." Walker maintained his composure. "We work with what we have, sir." Thompson nodded. "Well, that's changing. Your training unit will be equipped with the latest P-51 Mustangs. You've earned them." As Walker left headquarters, he found Technical Sergeant Carter waiting outside. "How'd it go, Major?" Carter asked, noting Walker's new rank insignia. "Better than expected," Walker replied. "We're getting P-51s for the training unit." Carter whistled appreciatively. "Those Rolls-Royce Merlin engines will make a difference. Higher altitude ceiling, better performance in thin air. And we're taking you and your maintenance team with us," Walker added. "Your modifications were crucial to making this work. I want you leading the technical division of the school." Carter's expression shifted from surprise to determination. "I won't let you down, sir." "You never have," Walker assured him. Over the next 6 months, the Atmospheric Combat School trained over 600 pilots in Walker's cloud cover tactics. The impact was immediately apparent in combat statistics. Allied fighter groups implementing MCTE reported a 38% increase in successful interceptions and a 24% reduction in aircraft losses. German air forces struggled to counter the new approach. They attempted various adaptations, flying at extreme high or low altitudes, deploying additional fighter escorts, even trying to predict and avoid areas with optimal cloud cover. None proved consistently effective against Walker's constantly evolving tactics. By early 1944, the tactical advantage in the Mediterranean air war had shifted decisively in favor of the Allies. German bomber losses became so severe that they were forced to dramatically reduce daylight operations, switching primarily to night missions. Walker's reputation grew among Allied pilots, though his name rarely appeared in official communiques. The tactics became known simply as cloud dancing or ghost fighting among the squadrons that employed them. In his sparse office at the training school, Walker kept a simple map on the wall tracking the implementation of his methods across various theaters of operation. Pins marked locations where MCTE had been successfully deployed, not just in the Mediterranean but increasingly in the European theater as well. Lieutenant Johnson, now Captain Johnson, and Walker's executive officer at the school, entered one afternoon with a newspaper. "You made the papers back home, sir," he said, handing the clipping to Walker. It was a small article from the Chicago Defender, one of the few newspapers that regularly covered the accomplishments of black service members. The headline read, "Negro Airman Revolutionizes Allied Air Combat Tactics." Walker scanned the article. It was more accurate than most, crediting him by name and briefly explaining the concept behind his tactics. "This actually gets it mostly right," he said with mild surprise. "Someone talked to someone who knew someone," Johnson replied with a shrug. "Word gets around, even if the official channels don't acknowledge it." Walker pinned the clipping to his map. "It's a start." In May 1944, Walker received orders to return to active combat operations. The Allied invasion of Europe was imminent, and experienced combat leaders were needed at the front. He was assigned command of the 455th Fighter Squadron, part of the newly formed 338th Fighter Group. Before departing the training school, Walker addressed the assembled instructors and students, a mixed group of pilots from various backgrounds, all united by their adoption of his tactical approach. "When I developed these methods, it wasn't about creating something new," Walker told them. "It was about recognizing something that had always been true. The difference between victory and defeat often comes down to perspective. See what others miss, use what others overlook, turn disadvantage into advantage. These aren't just tactics for flying, they're principles for living." The 455th deployed to England in June 1944, days after the D-Day invasion. Their mission was to provide air support for ground forces pushing inland from the Normandy beaches. Walker's squadron flew P-51 Mustangs, finally receiving the same equipment as other fighter groups. On their first combat patrol over Normandy, Walker led 16 aircraft arranged in his now standard multi-layer formation. The weather was perfect for his tactics, scattered cumulus clouds at multiple altitudes providing ideal cover for his approach. German aircraft were attempting to attack Allied ground positions near Caen when Walker's squadron intercepted them. Using the cloud layer tactics now refined through months of implementation and training, the 455th successfully diverted the entire German formation without losing a single aircraft. After the mission, Walker received an unexpected visitor at their temporary airfield in southern England. Brigadier General Benjamin Davis, the former instructor who had encouraged Walker to develop alternative tactics at Tuskegee, had come to witness the results firsthand. "I heard they're calling it Walker's method now," Davis said as they walked among the parked P-51s. Walker shook his head modestly. "Not officially, sir, just among some of the pilots." Davis smiled. "Official recognition has a way of catching up eventually. But that's not why I'm here. I wanted to tell you personally that your approach has been adopted by every fighter group in Europe. The Germans have nicknamed our fighters cloud ghosts." Walker absorbed this with quiet satisfaction. "They're adapting, though. It's getting harder to surprise them." "So we keep evolving," Davis replied. "That's the real lesson here, isn't it? The tactics will change, but the principle remains. Use what makes you different as your strength." Over the next year, Walker continued to refine and adapt his approach as the air war evolved. When German forces began flying exclusively at night to avoid Allied fighters, Walker developed modified cloud cover tactics for night operations, using moonlight on cloud tops for orientation. By early 1945, with Allied forces pushing into Germany itself, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. Fuel shortages and pilot losses had reduced German air operations to a fraction of their previous levels. Walker's squadron, like many Allied fighter groups, increasingly found themselves conducting ground attack missions due to the lack of aerial targets. In March 1945, Walker was summoned to Supreme Allied Headquarters in Paris. He entered the imposing building with some trepidation, uncertain why he had been called away from his squadron during active operations. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Tedder, Deputy Supreme Commander under Eisenhower, received Walker in his office. "Major Walker," Tedder began, "I've asked you here because we're compiling a comprehensive analysis of the air war for post-war doctrine. Your tactical innovations have been identified as one of the most significant developments in fighter combat." Walker sat straighter in his chair. "Thank you, sir," Tedder continued. "We're establishing a joint Allied tactical review board to formalize these lessons for future air forces. General Eisenhower has approved your appointment to this board, along with promotion to Lieutenant Colonel." Walker was momentarily speechless. This wasn't just acknowledgement, it was institutional adoption of his methods at the highest level. "The board will convene after the conclusion of hostilities," Tedder explained. "Until then, you're to document everything, not just the tactics themselves, but the thinking behind them, the processes that led to their development." "I understand, sir," Walker replied. "Though I should mention that these methods weren't developed by me alone. My entire squadron contributed." Tedder nodded. "Noted. Include their contributions in your documentation. This isn't about individual credit. It's about capturing innovation for future generations." As Walker left the headquarters building, he paused on the steps, looking up at the cloud-scattered sky that had become both his battlefield and his ally. The tactics he had developed out of necessity had changed the nature of aerial combat, saving countless Allied lives in the process. The war in Europe ended 2 months later. Walker attended the formal surrender ceremony as part of the Allied Air Force's delegation, one of only 3 black officers present. As he watched the German representatives sign the documents, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from a segregated airfield in Alabama to the heart of Allied victory. After the war, Walker served on the Joint Tactical Review Board as promised, helping to codify his methods into official air combat doctrine. His approach, now formally designated Multi-Dimensional Environmental Tactical Engagement, became standard training for fighter pilots in both the United States and Royal Air Forces. Walker himself remained in the military through its integration under President Truman's Executive Order 9981 in 1948. He eventually rose to the rank of Brigadier General, one of the first black officers to achieve general officer rank in the United States Air Force. In 1954, a decade after his innovative tactics had helped turn the tide of the air war in Europe, Walker returned to Tuskegee to address a graduating class of aviation students at the now integrated flight school. "The clouds taught me something essential about both combat and life," he told the young pilots. "What appears to be an obstacle can become an advantage if you change your perspective. The same clouds that blocked our vision became our greatest tactical asset once we learned to see them differently." He scanned the faces of the students, a diverse group that would have been impossible in his day. "The world will often tell you what you can't do, where you don't belong, what isn't possible. Those are just clouds. Learn to navigate through them, around them, above them. Better yet, learn to use them to your advantage." Walker's tactical innovations continued to influence military aviation long after his retirement. During the Cold War, his principles of using natural cover and environmental factors were expanded and incorporated into stealth technology development. Modern air combat simulators still include scenarios based on his original cloud cover engagement patterns. In 1972, Walker was finally awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his contributions to Allied victory, 28 years after his tactics had changed the course of the air war. At the ceremony, now retired General Williams, who had supported Walker's innovations from the beginning, addressed the audience. "History doesn't always recognize innovation in the moment," he said. "Sometimes it takes decades for us to fully appreciate transformative thinking." James Walker didn't just develop new tactics, he changed how we think about warfare itself, by showing us how to turn perceived disadvantage into decisive advantage. Walker, by then in his 60s, accepted the medal with characteristic humility. When asked by a reporter if he felt the recognition was overdue, he smiled slightly. "Time is like those clouds we used to fly through," he replied. "It obscures some things and reveals others." What matters isn't when the recognition comes, but that the lives saved by these tactics weren't lost in vain. The reporter pressed further. Your tactics are still taught today. How does that feel? Walker considered this for a moment. The best innovations outlive their creators, he said finally. These weren't just my tactics. They belong to everyone who helped develop them, everyone who implemented them, and now they belong to history. That's as it should be. Today, Walker's approach is studied not just in military academies, but in business schools as well, cited as a classic example of innovation born from necessity and perspective. His original tactical manual, once classified, now resides in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, alongside a restored P-40 Warhawk, painted in the markings of his original aircraft. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came in 2001, when NASA astronaut Colonel Michael Freeman, the first black commander of the International Space Station, carried a page from Walker's tactical manual into orbit. General Walker taught us to see the clouds differently, Freeman said in a transmission from space. From up here you realize just how right he was. It's all about perspective. James Walker's legacy lives on not just in military doctrine, but in the principle he embodied throughout his life and career. The most powerful innovations often come from those who bring different perspectives to old problems. His story reminds us that sometimes the greatest advantage comes from seeing what others overlook, whether above the clouds of the Mediterranean or in the broader skies of human potential. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.